This section of our project is looking at selections, and for this example I'm going to use this Ford Taurus, which I have already cut apart into different layers, and you can see that by turning off the background layer and turn on the various layers here that I've cut apart. Basically any headlight separated, any tail lights, any marker lights, Ford symbol, windshield glass, everything you wanted to get separate, because this is actually an assignment in the course that I do for DM125, where I have the student take the body of the car that they've cut out. In this case it's red, and I'm going to go to image and adjustments and hue and saturation. There's a couple different ways to change the color of it, but in this case I like to colorize it. Now it is kind of nice to have the background layer on while you're doing this, and make sure you're selected on the layer copy of your body of the car, and go back into image, adjustments, and hue and saturation, and click on colorize, and then from there you can change the color of the car to whatever you want. And if you did it right, if you did select it all correctly out, it should come out pretty good. And you don't want to mess with your saturation and your lightness. Just don't go too far, because it might start to look fake. Okay, but that's the purpose of that assignment, is to change the color of the car, and just the color of the car, with the background. Now in order to get to that point, there are several different things you need to do, and that would be the selection tool. So to kind of start out, I'm going to take my background copy and make a copy of it, drag it down to the new piece of paper, and I'm going to turn off the original background, and I'm going to work off just this background copy too. I also have a solid color layer that I like to drag below the one I'm selecting from, and when I go to select and delete, like for example, if I just use the marquee tool, the regular marquee tool, rectangular, as I select here, and I make sure I'm on the background copy 2 layer, when I delete, that other one will come through, the color. And that allows me to see really close to the lines and make sure I'm getting good detail when I'm selecting. So we'll see that come out here in a little bit, but we're not going to do the whole entire thing here. We're just going to go and start to select the object out and show you some different ways to do selection. So one of the ways to get rid of marquee is to Control D to deselect it. Now you've got the rectangular marquee tool. As you can tell, it does a rectangle or a square. Underneath that tool, if you hold down your left mouse button, you'll find the elliptical marquee tool. That allows you to make ovals, or if you hold down shift, you can make a perfect circle. Now holding down shift, it starts from where the crosshairs are of my cursor. If I were to hold down alt key, it'll start the circle from the center where the crosshairs are. And likewise, if I hold down shift and then alt, I can make a perfect circle from where the crosshairs are. And that comes in pretty handy depending on what you're trying to select. Okay, some other selection tools. We've got the single row marquee and single column, which are going to pick one pixel width all the way down, or horizontal, vertical in that case. Not too many uses for those. But the other one is the lasso tool. And if I come in a little bit close and zoom in on this object, I can take the lasso tool, and it depends on where I click, and as I click and drag across there, I'll start to select around something. Now in this case, I always teach the students to select small areas, so my object has to delete the background, so I'm going to select just right along the car, and then select a big chunk of the background, and then delete. Make sure again I'm on that copy layer of the car. Delete that out of there, and I can do that all the way around the object. Makes it a lot easier than trying to select the whole thing at one time. Now if you don't quite like that, I'm not too steady on how my selection does with the lasso tool. I like to go with the polygonal lasso tool, and sometimes I even like to zoom in a little bit further. I'm not going to go as far for the purpose of the video, but the polygonal lasso tool allows you to click, and then in a straight line wherever you start from, it'll let you click again and click again to make the selection. Now to get the rounded part of the car, I like to come in short increments and just click and click and click, and sometimes Photoshop starts to have problems with this. It looks like it's not working, but it actually is. So as I do that, I can get more detailed if I was taking my time there. And go ahead and come back around here, make a big selection, double click when I'm done, and there's my selection. I can delete it. I'm getting some nice soft edges on here because I've got a 2 pixel feather If I change that, I'll get hard edges or softer edges. Another tool is the magnetic lasso tool, and most students like this tool. I tend to call it the lazy tool, mainly because once you click one time and then you drag your mouse around along the line that you want to do, it'll automatically create anchor points for you. Anchor points that you can later on adjust. And it does make life a bit easier, but as you can see here, it picks up similar pixels to where I started, and it's kind of having trouble between the darker red and the black. It can't quite line up right. And then when you're done, you just drag out away from there and close the selection, double click, and there you can delete. Okay, so that one, it can be considered a lazy tool, but I don't know, it's up to your personal preference. Now let's say you made a selection and you decided you wanted the opposite of that selection. They have something called select and inverse, and it basically selects the rest of the object. If you could see the whole image, you can see now the marquee lines are all the way around. If I inverse that back to where it was, then it's just right here. But again, if I inverse, then I've got the opposite of where I selected, and when I delete all that. Pretty handy when you're trying to get some different shapes. Some other selection tools are the magic wand. In this case, it's not really going to work out as well as it could in other objects. It likes solid colors, but as I click, it'll start to pick up similar pixels to where I clicked. And you can change that by changing the tolerance up here. If I go down to a 5 tolerance and I click, I'm not going to get as much because it's trying to limit the area of where it selects. A larger tolerance would get me similar pixels, not exactly the same color. So if we go up to 100 and select again, we're going to get a lot. So the larger, the more similar pixels in the pictures are selected. The quick select tool lets you drag your mouse, just like a brush. You can make it larger or smaller like a brush, but it lets you drag your mouse along and select areas that are similar pixels. And sometimes it works pretty good, sometimes it doesn't. It's kind of like the magnetic one. It tries to guess and do the work for you. So those are pretty much some basic selection tools that we have available. There are other techniques you can do, like let's say you want more than just a rectangular selection. Let's say maybe I want to make a button. And if I go ahead and make a new Photoshop file here, let's say I want to make a button with rounded edges. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start out, I'm just going to take a black color for this example, and I'm going to start out with a rectangle. And I'm going to drag it across where I want it. And then I'm going to fill it. So I now have a filled in rectangle. Now, I'm going to take my guides up here in the top, I'm going to drag them down, put them on top of the marquee, because that's going to give me the height of my circle, my rounded part of this that I want. So I'm going to deselect that, Control D, and then I'm going to take the elliptical marquee tool, and I can come in here, and I'm going to hold down Shift to make sure I do a perfect circle, and then from one top guide down to the bottom guide, I'm going to drag until I make a perfect circle, the height of that, which is already there. And then go ahead and fill that in. And depending on where you put it, and you can still move at this point too, you will have a rounded button edge. I didn't quite get exactly correct there, but I can zoom in, and we'll go ahead and do it for the other side. Holding down Shift again to make a perfect circle, filling it in with the paint bucket. Since I still have the move tool on, I can actually move it over with my arrow keys. Line it up where I want, and there we go, we've got a rounded button. And from there you can do other things like blending options and all that, where you right click on the layer, go to blending options, and we can do things like drop shadows, and we can do our bevel and emboss to make it look like an actual button. So just some of the things you can do with that, and that's some of the options you'll learn in this lesson.